Well, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ellie. I've been based with ECFR for the past over a decade now, and I've had the misfortune of watching the highs and lows of Europe-Iran relations. And for anyone that has been watching the Middle East, the last 2 weeks have been rather head-spinning days and hours. By the hour, things shift and change, but I think we are starting to see the dust settle and collect some thoughts. But before I say a few things about where we go forward, I might ask my colleagues to put my 5 minutes here so I don't ramble too much. Let me take you back to 2018, when this council met in May in Paris. And I remember Mark opening the session a few weeks after President Trump in his first term decided to leave the nuclear deal. And I remember Mark basically ringing the alarm bells for European capitals to say that this was one of the first and major pain points that was inflicted to the rules-based international order that Europe had been so steadfast in defending. And that essentially this was a wake-up call for European strategic autonomy to preserve the deal and much more going forward. We, in my program at ECFR, warned a few things. We first warned that there was no unicorn better deal than what was struck between the world powers and Iran on the nuclear issue. We also said that the US decision to withdraw from the deal was likely to accelerate the Iranian nuclear program, and we've seen just that. And finally, we said that sooner or later, this was going to pave the way for military action and potentially war. Now, fast forward 7 years, almost exactly, and we are now coming out of an unprecedented so-called 12-day war between Israel and Iran, which may continue on and off for many years to come. We have, for the first time, seen the United States take military action inside Iran with unprecedented force using its bunker-busted bombs. We have seen hundreds of civilian deaths on both sides. We have seen military and economic costs on both sides, and lives upended for millions in both Israel and Iran. We have seen 2 nuclear-armed states attacking a non-nuclear state, which is a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we have, I think, a shocking state of disarray across European capitals who can't agree on whether this military action by the US and Israel was legal or not. And we go back to the previous panel of fully entering the law of the jungle territory now in the Middle East. So where do we go from here? Now, what my program is working on is essentially outlining the options that are facing us right now. In my view, the best option ahead, and I'll come back to this, is still a negotiated settlement, both between Iran and the US, but also Iran and Israel. Second option is entering a much more longer-term period of war between Israel and Iran, a war of attrition in which no sides will come out as winners, only losers, including here for us in Europe. The third option is, I think, one that is becoming increasingly likely, unfortunately, is contending with a nuclear-armed Iran. The debate in Iran is certainly shifting that way. And a fourth option, which again I think is untenable for Europe and actually in practice, is a continuation of a no war, no peace arrangement that Iran and the US have had for so long, but now has been ruptured. And my worry about the current ceasefire in place between Israel and Iran and the US is that it's really untenable. Because of an emergence of Israel 2.0 since the atrocities of the 7th of October, we're now faced with an Israel that has complete freedom of navigation and autonomy in the skies of the Middle East. There seems to be no red lines drawn on its actions. The one single moment that we've seen a clear red line was the F-bomb being dropped by President Trump earlier this week, which seems to have moderated the position of the Israeli government. But for how long can this last? Now, in our view, where Europeans should be investing their time and resources is on a diplomatic mission spearheaded at the heads of government in the very imminent days and weeks ahead. Now, can this work? Well, it's going to be much tougher than before. As one of our council members, Enrique Mora, wrote this week, who was one of the chief EU negotiators, The wall of mistrust now on Tehran's side is huge. He wrote that Iran has twice realized that nuclear diplomacy is both reversible and fragile. Secondly, Trump and his administration are still sticking to extremely maximalist demands. And finally, Tehran's actions over the last few weeks in terms of restricting the access of international monitors makes it technically very, very difficult to reach a deal because of our baseline knowledge being shifted so much. Now, I'll end up by saying 4 things that I think Europeans should stick to. One thing is they should stick to the facts and use their historical knowledge about the 20 years of diplomacy we've had, the ups and downs, and what works and what doesn't work in terms of getting US and Iran to a negotiated settlement. Secondly, stick to what they do best, which is finding a zone of agreement between Washington and Tehran on how they can avert war and have a political off-ramp. Thirdly, I think they should be working with stabilizing partners rather than encouraging the actions of destabilizing allies like Israel. If you look at how the GCC states, particularly countries like Oman, have positioned themselves to extend their leverage with both the US and Iran, I think this is something we should be trying to emulate. And fourthly, again, it goes back to the last panel. It might be easy to have tactical wins right now that makes us feel great against an adversary like Iran, that we have many, many areas of disagreement with, including on Russia, including on human rights, including on detainees. But this doesn't conclude with a strategic outlook and a strategic win in the long term. If you consider what instability and war with Iran would do to a country of Iran's size of 90 million people and what that might mean for European security in the long term, I think this should make all of us in Europe stick to the diplomatic path. Now, I'll end by saying that, looking back at 2018, maybe we were too ambitious at ECFR to talk about strategic autonomy, but I think that's the job of think tanks, for us to push the barriers. But again, at least back then, Europe was politically and strategically in the right place when it came to the Iran file. I just hope that in 10 years' time, when we meet again here, that we can say the same about what Europe does from here on.